On my wedding night, my own father broke down the cabin door and screamed, "You're mine! No one touches what's mine!" He grabbed me by the hair to drag me away. But what my husband did that night saved my life and destroyed the monster who raised me. Hi, my dear ones. Hi, my sweethearts. It's so good to have you here with me today. Sit down, make yourselves comfortable, because Grandma is going to tell you a story I've carried in my heart for many years. My name is Clara Mae Henderson. I'm 76 years old, and I was born and still live here in Millbrook, Tennessee. This is my land, you know, where the cold north wind blows hard in winter and where the smell of wood smoke fills the streets when the real cold comes. These days, my days are pretty peaceful, thank God. Every morning, bright and early, I wake up to the singing of birds that nest in the old apple tree in my backyard. I brew my coffee strong and black, the way I learned from my mother when I was a girl, and sit on the wooden porch of my little house. It's a simple house, but it's mine, you understand? One with a lot of sweat and tears, but mine. Before I continue, my loves, I need to ask you for a little something. If you're enjoying our conversation, click that like button down below and subscribe to the channel, okay? Turn on the notification bell too, because every week I come here to talk with you, tell stories, share a piece of my life. You have no idea how good it makes me feel to know there are people on the other side listening to me, keeping me company. And you, my dear ones, who are watching me now, tell me here in the comments, what little town are you watching from, and what time of day did you find this video? In the morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of love. Now, taking a deep breath, I need to talk about something I've carried with me since I was a young woman. A story that few know, but that shaped who I am today. It's about the most terrifying and at the same time most liberating night of my life. About a father who imprisoned me in a way that no one saw, and about a man who became my salvation when I needed it most. This story begins way back when I was still a child playing barefoot on the dirt roads of this same Millbrook. My childhood here in Millbrook began in a large wooden house in what they now call the Oak Hill District, but back then it was almost rural. The house sat on a huge lot, had a tall black iron gate, and my father, Frederick James Henderson, insisted on keeping that gate always locked. He said it was to protect us, that the world out there was too dangerous for his family. My father was a man of means. He owned land, raised cattle, sold timber from the oak and pine forests. Back then you still could, you know? He was respected in town, always wore a suit, a wide-brimmed hat, and had a black Ford that was the envy of everyone. People greeted him on the street with respect, some even with fear. He had a strong presence, you know? The kind where when he entered a room, everyone went quiet. My mother, Dorothy Ann, was a petite woman with brown hair always pulled back in a tight bun. She took care of the house, cooked, embroidered, but was far too quiet. Today, looking back, I see that she lived on tiptoes, as if afraid to make noise. She taught me things in whispers, how to make biscuits, how to wash clothes, how to tend the chickens in the yard, but always looking at the door, always attentive to my father's footsteps. I had a brother, Robert, 3 years older than me. He was like my father, strong, a man of few words, and from early on, my father took him into the business, teaching him to be a real man, as he said. Robert protected me when he could, but as he grew older, he became more and more like my father, and that protection disappeared. Our routine was very set. I woke up with the rooster's crow, helped my mother make breakfast, homemade biscuits, butter, fig preserves, fresh cheese. My father sat at the head of the table, and we ate in silence, only speaking if he asked something. After breakfast, I had to study. My father hired a private teacher, Miss Hilda, because he didn't want me going to school with just anyone, as he put it. I liked Miss Hilda. She was sweet, patient, taught me to read, write, do arithmetic. But the lessons were right there in the house, in the little room my father called the library. I'd look through the windows at other children passing by on the street, laughing, playing, and I'd want to be out there with them. When I finished my lessons, I could play in the yard, but only in the yard, never on the street. My father said that a family girl didn't hang around on the street like riffraff. I played alone most of the time, made little houses with stones and sticks, talked to the chickens, climbed the apple tree in the back. Sometimes Teresa, daughter of our housekeeper, Mrs. Ella, would play with me. She was my age, had short curly hair, and we'd make up games, house, school, pretend tea parties. But I noticed my father didn't like it when Teresa came over. He'd look through the window with a closed expression, and then call Mrs. Ella to give her some errands, and the girl would leave. I'd be upset, but I didn't say anything. We learned early not to contradict my father. When I turned about 8 or 9 years old, I started to notice some strange things. My father began paying more attention to me. It wasn't that normal father attention, you know? It was different. He'd ask where I'd been, even though I'd only been in the yard. He'd ask who I'd talked to, even though I barely talked to anyone. If Miss Hilda complimented me because I'd done well on a lesson, he'd be all proud, but in a way that gave me a tightness in my chest. There was one thing that bothered me a lot. My father wouldn't let me cut my hair. My hair was long, very dark, reached almost to my waist, and he said it was my princess crown. My mother would braid my hair every day, very tight, and my father insisted on watching. He'd run his hand through my braids and say, "That's my girl, my pretty girl." And that, even though I was a child, left me with a chill in my stomach. At family gatherings, Grandma Gertrude's birthday, Christmas, Easter, my father would put me in a pretty dress, make me stay by his side the whole time. If any cousin or uncle came to talk to me, he'd quickly change the subject and pull me away. I was like his decoration, you know? He'd show me off to everyone, but wouldn't let anyone get too close. I didn't really understand what was happening, but there was something heavy in the air of that house. My mother lived tense. My brother didn't play with me anymore, and I felt more and more alone, even though I was surrounded by people. In winter, when the cold pressed in and frost covered the yard in white, I'd sit near the wood stove and stare at the flames. I dreamed of being like that fire, free to dance, to illuminate, to go wherever I wanted. But I was trapped in that big cold house, with that iron gate always locked, and with a father who looked at me in a way that, even as a child, I already knew wasn't right. As I grew older, that look got heavier, and the gate higher, and the world outside increasingly distant. When I turned 13, my body began to change, and with it, my father's behavior also changed. He became more vigilant, more present, more suffocating. I remember my 13th birthday as if it were yesterday. My mother had made a pound cake, my favorite, with cream cheese frosting. She lit 13 candles and sang happy birthday softly because my father didn't like noise. When I went to blow out the candles, my father held my hand and said, looking into my eyes in a way that chilled me, "Now you're not a child anymore, Clara. Now you need to be even more careful. The world out there is full of men who want to take advantage of pretty young ladies. But you're my daughter. I'll protect you. Always." The word always echoed in my head for days. It sounded more like a sentence than a promise. Around that time, my father started taking me along to some appointments, meetings with cattle buyers, dinners with businessmen, Sunday church. He insisted I stay by his side, always in a nice dress, hair down or with a satin ribbon. "This is my daughter, Clara, the jewel of my house," he'd introduce me to everyone. And he'd hold my hand, or place his hand on my back, or fix my hair. Always touching me, always marking me as his property. I started to feel the boys' stares, at church, in the town square when my father took me to buy fabric, at the general store. But as soon as a boy looked in my direction, my father would get closer, pull me by the arm, and cast a look that made the boy quickly look away. Once, a boy my age, the pharmacist's son, came to talk to me after church. He asked my name, said he thought I was pretty. My father appeared out of nowhere, put his hand on the boy's shoulder with such force that I saw him grimace in pain, and said very quietly, but with a voice that cut, "This girl isn't for you. Forget she exists." The boy left immediately, and I felt my face burn with shame. When I was 15, some young men started showing interest in courting me. Small-town stuff, you know? Families knew each other, and parents talked about marriages for their children. Appeared Eddie's son of a rancher friend of my father's. Handsome boy, polite, who had just returned from Nashville where he was studying. He came to dinner at our house with his father. During dinner, he tried to talk to me, asked me some questions about what I liked to do. I answered shyly, happy to finally have someone paying attention to me. After they left, my father called me into the living room. He was standing with his back to me, looking out the window. When he turned around, he had an expression on his face I'd never seen before. A mixture of anger and something else, something that scared me. "You're not going to marry that boy, Clara," he said, his voice low but firm. "But father, I didn't even—" I tried to speak. "I said no!" he shouted, and I jumped in fright. "You think I didn't see? I saw how you smiled at him, how you answered his questions, all animated. You want to abandon me? After everything I've done for you?" Tears ran down my face. "No, father, I don't want to abandon anyone. I just—" He approached, held my face with both hands, squeezing my cheeks. "You're my daughter, mine. No man in this world will be good enough for you. None. Understand?" I nodded, trembling. He released me and left the room. I stood there crying silently, tasting blood in my mouth where he'd pressed too hard. After that day, 3 more young men appeared over the following months. They all left after talking with my father. I never knew what he told them, but they came out pale, fear in their eyes, and never looked in my direction again. I felt like a prisoner. The house had become my cell, my father, my jailer, and there was no way to escape, because where would I go? I had no money, didn't know the world outside, had no one who could help me. My mother lived in her own world, quiet, accepting everything. My brother Robert had left home, went to work in Memphis, and barely came back. It was when I was 17 that I met Michael. He appeared one March afternoon in 1966. My father had hired him to do some carpentry work on the property, fix fences, renovate the barn, build some new furniture. Michael was from Knoxville, had come to Millbrook looking for work. He was tall, broad-shouldered, large, calloused hands of someone who worked hard. But what caught my attention most were his eyes. Dark eyes, deep, that seemed to hold stories he never told. He was a man of few words. He'd arrive early, work all day almost in silence, and leave at the end of the afternoon. But I noticed that, from time to time, he'd look at me. It wasn't a bold look, no, it was different. It was a look of someone who understood, you know, as if he saw that I was trapped there and felt sorry. One day, I was in the yard hanging clothes on the line. My mother had stayed in bed with a headache, and Michael was fixing the back fence. I felt him watching me. I turned my head, and our eyes met. He didn't look away. Neither did I. We stayed like that for a few seconds that seemed eternal. My heart beat so hard, I thought he'd hear it from where he was. He went back to his work, but that night I couldn't sleep. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. In the following days, we started exchanging glances. Small, quick ones, always being careful so my father wouldn't see. Once, when he passed by me carrying a board, he said very quietly, almost in a whisper, "You deserve to be free." And he kept walking as if nothing had happened. Those words moved me in a way I can't explain. Someone had seen my prison. Someone understood. We started communicating in secret. He'd leave little notes hidden under a rock in the back of the yard, near the apple tree. I'd respond and leave them in the same place. They were simple notes, short but loaded with meaning. "Are you okay today? I thought of you. Don't give up." My father suspected nothing. To him, Michael was just another employee, a quiet man who did his work and left. But to me, Michael was becoming the only light in the darkness I lived in. One day, in a note, he wrote, "I can get you out of here, if you want." I held that paper with trembling hands. I cried. For the first time in years, I cried with relief. Someone was offering me a way out. Someone was willing to save me. I wrote back, "Yes, please." And that's how our escape plan disguised as marriage began. But we didn't yet imagine what my father would be capable of when he found out. The following months were the hardest of my life until then. Michael and I continued exchanging notes under that rock, but we had to be extremely careful. My father had finished hiring him for the jobs, but Michael found a way to stay nearby. He got work at a sawmill near Millbrook, and sometimes, on Sunday mornings very early, when my father went to the field to check on the cattle, we'd meet quickly. There was an abandoned chapel on the old road to Bristol, hidden among the pine trees. That's where we'd see each other. I'd make up excuses, tell my mother I was going to Miss Hilda's house to get some books, or that I was going to the corner store to buy thread for embroidery. My mother, poor thing, never suspected. Or if she did, she pretended not to see, perhaps afraid of what my father would do if he knew she'd let me go out. In those meetings, Michael told me about his life. He'd grown up alone. His parents had died when he was young, raised by an uncle who beat him for anything. He'd learned to defend himself early, not to trust anyone, to keep everything inside. But with me, he opened up. He told me he'd never felt anything like what he felt for me, that he'd protect me from anything, that we'd manage to get out of there together. I believed him. I had to believe. He was my only hope. But as the months passed, my father began to notice I was different. I couldn't hide the small light of hope that had been born inside me. He noticed, and he didn't like it at all. One night, in September 1966, my father called me into his study. He was sitting behind the solid wood desk, fingers interlaced, looking at me with that look I'd learned to fear. "Sit down, Clara," he said, pointing to the chair in front of the desk. I sat, hands sweaty, heart racing. "You've been different," he began, his voice too calm, which was always a bad sign. "Smiling more, distracted, as if you were thinking about something or someone." "No, Father, I tried to speak. He raised his hand, silencing me. "I'm not stupid, Clara. I know when someone's hiding something from me. And you, my daughter, are hiding something." The silence in the room was so heavy I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. He stood up, walked around the desk, stood next to me. He put his hand on my shoulder, squeezing. "You don't need anyone, understand? You have everything here. You have this house, you have food, you have good clothes, you have your father who takes care of you. What man in this world could give you more than I give you?" His hand squeezed harder, and I held back the urge to cry. "None, Father," I whispered. "Exactly, none. So you stop this nonsense of dreaming about Prince Charming. That doesn't exist. What exists is me, taking care of you, protecting you, always." He released me and went back behind the desk. "You can go." I left there, trembling, but more determined than ever. I needed to get out of that house. I needed Michael. The next day, I left a note for him under the rock. "My father is getting suspicious. We need to hurry everything." Michael responded the same day. "I'll figure something out. Trust me." And he figured it out. He discovered that if we went to Bristol, a neighboring town where no one knew us well, we could get married at the courthouse without needing my father's authorization. I was of age, had just turned 18 in October 1966. Legally, I could marry on my own. We planned everything in secret. On January 15, 1967, a Monday with strong sun and blue sky, I told my mother I was going to Miss Hilda's house to spend the afternoon helping her organize some books. My mother nodded without looking into my eyes. To this day, I wonder if she knew, if she'd guessed my plan and let me go because, deep down, she wanted me to be free. I left the house with a small bundle hidden under my shawl. I had a change of clothes, my birth certificate that I'd stolen from my father's study drawer, and a photo of my mother. Just that. I left everything behind. Michael was waiting for me on the old road, near the little chapel, with a truck borrowed from a friend. We went straight to Bristol. At the courthouse, we signed the papers with trembling hands. I became Clara May Henderson Miller, wife of Michael James Miller. The clerk, a gentleman with a gray mustache, looked at us and said, "You running away from something?" Michael answered, his voice firm, "Yes, but now we're running away together." The man nodded and stamped the papers. "Then get going, and good luck." We left there married, but we knew the worst was yet to come. My father would find out. And when he did, he wouldn't accept it. Michael had rented a cabin in the mountains near Gatlinburg, in an isolated place, surrounded by pine trees and thick forest. He said we needed to stay hidden for a few days until things calmed down, until we could plan where we'd live, how we'd start over. We arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. It was a simple wooden structure with a fireplace, a double bed, a small kitchen, and a porch with a view of the endless green of the mountains. It seemed like a dream. Finally, I was free. But that night, when I lay in bed next to Michael, I felt a tightness in my chest. A bad feeling, as if something was about to happen. Michael held my hand and said, "It's all okay now. You're safe with me." I wanted to believe. But deep down, I knew my father wouldn't let it go. He'd said so many times, "You're mine, always." And men like him didn't accept losing what they considered theirs. I didn't know that that same night, while the north wind whistled outside and the rain began to fall heavily on the roof, my father was already coming after me. He'd found out where I was, and he was coming to take me back. The storm started around 9 at night. The wind shook the cabin windows with a force that seemed to want to tear everything apart. The rain beat on the wooden roof like 1,000 fingers drumming endlessly, and the thunder exploded outside, making the entire structure shake to its foundations. The smell of wet earth entered through the window cracks, mixed with the aroma of smoke from the fireplace that Michael had lit to warm the place. He hugged me tight, saying everything was okay, that we were safe there, protected by the thick forest and the isolation of those mountains. I tried to believe. I wanted so badly to believe. We had soup for dinner that he'd prepared, made with potatoes, carrots, and pieces of sausage he'd bought on the road. The heat of the soup going down my throat brought me momentary comfort. We talked about the future, where we'd live, what kind of life we'd build together. He talked about going to the countryside, buying a little piece of land, raising some animals, planting a garden, having children. 3, at least, he said, smiling in a way that lit up his face. I smiled back, imagining that simple, free life I'd always dreamed of. A life where no one would tell me I was someone's property. Around 11 at night, we lay down. I was exhausted. It had been a long day, full of emotions that had drained me completely. The fear of the escape, the adrenaline of the secret marriage, the hope of a new life, the trip to the cabin. Everything had left me exhausted, as if every drop of energy had been wrung from my body. Michael hugged me from behind, his warm body against mine, his arm heavy and protective over my waist. I felt for the first time in my life what it was to feel truly protected, not imprisoned. It was different. It was like breathing fresh air after years of breathing ashes. It was good. It was peace. I was almost falling asleep, already in that zone between being awake and sleeping, when I heard a different noise outside. A creaking of wood, maybe, or the sound of an engine muffled by the rain. I thought it was a branch falling because of the wind, so I didn't worry. I closed my eyes again, letting the sound of the rain lull me. The noise of the storm was so loud, so constant, that it muffled any other sound. It was as if the world outside had disappeared, and only that cabin existed, that bed, that wool blanket that smelled of mothballs, me and Michael. But then, in an instant that was engraved in my memory like hot iron marking flesh, the bedroom door was broken down. The crash was so loud that for a second I thought it had been lightning striking the house. Wood shattering into pieces, hinges breaking with a horrible metallic snap, screws flying. I jumped in bed, my heart racing so fast it felt like it would come out of my mouth, not understanding what was happening, my mind still caught between sleep and waking. Michael was already getting up, in a quick instinctive movement, positioning his body in front of mine like a human shield. And then I saw him, my father. He was standing in the frame of the destroyed door, drenched by the rain, the black suit he so valued stuck to his body like a second skin, his gray hair always so neatly combed now disheveled, dripping dirty water on the wooden floor, his face red with anger or exertion, or both, and his eyes. My God, his eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They weren't human eyes. They were the eyes of something that had completely lost its reason, completely lost its humanity. Something wild, wounded, dangerous, like a cornered animal that decides to attack. He didn't look at Michael, not once. It was as if my husband didn't even exist there, as if he were invisible, irrelevant. He looked straight at me, and in that look I saw everything. The obsession he'd harbored for years, the rage of having been contradicted, the madness that had been hidden behind that mask of respectable father he wore in town. "Clara," he said, his voice low but cutting like broken glass tearing skin. "Get out of that bed. Now." I couldn't move. My body had turned to stone. I was paralyzed with fear, the same fear I felt when I was a child and heard him climbing the stairs at night. Michael took a step forward, placing himself between me and my father, his broad shoulders blocking my view. "You don't have the right to be here," Michael said, his voice calm but firm, each word measured. "She's my wife now. We're legally married. There are signed papers, recognized by the courthouse." My father laughed. It was a horrible laugh, hoarse, without any trace of joy, only bitterness and contempt. "Wife! You think a paper changes anything? A paper is just paper. She's my daughter. Mine. I raised her. I fed her. I took care of her all these years. No paper will change that. No man will take her from me." He advanced into the room with heavy steps, and then everything happened too fast and too slow at the same time. My father went right past Michael, or tried to pass, pushing him with his shoulder, and came straight to the bed like an enraged bull. He leaned over me and grabbed my long hair with both hands, wrapping the strands around his fingers, with such force that I felt my scalp burn with pain, as if it were on fire. I screamed. A scream that came from the depths of my soul, a scream of pure, primitive terror that I didn't even know existed inside me. "You're not going to give yourself to him," my father shouted, pulling my hair mercilessly, dragging me toward the edge of the bed, my body sliding over the sheets. "You're mine! No one touches what's mine! No one! You're going to come back home and forget this man exists!" I grabbed onto the sheets with absolute desperation, my nails digging into the fabric so hard I heard threads breaking, my whole body resisting, my legs kicking the air, trying to find support, but he was much stronger. He was pulling me, dragging me like I was a rag doll, and I felt like I was being torn apart inside. It wasn't just the physical pain of my hair being pulled out, whole locks coming out from the roots. It was the pain of seeing that he would never leave me in peace. Never. Even married, even an adult, even having fled to a place where no one knew who we were. He had found me, had come to get me, and he was going to take me back. He was going to lock me in that house again, in that room, behind that iron gate. And this time, I knew deep in my soul there would be no more escape. He would watch me day and night. He would kill me with living. "Father, please!" I screamed, crying, begging, my voice coming out strangled. "Let me go! Let me go! Please!" But he didn't let go. He kept dragging me with that inhuman strength that rage gives people, and I kept holding on to the sheets that were already coming off the mattress, fighting, screaming, crying, feeling that my life had ended there. That everything had been useless. The escape, the marriage, the hope of being free, everything had been an illusion. I would never escape him. Never. "You're going to come back home with me," he said, snarling the words through clenched teeth. "And you're going to forget this man exists. Forget all of this ridiculous marriage, this pathetic escape, because you're not his. You never will be. You're my daughter, my girl, mine." In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't my body, despite the pain. It was something much deeper. It was my soul. I felt as if all the air had left my lungs and would never come back. I felt like I was going to die there, in that cabin lost in the mountains, dragged by that man who should have protected me, but who, in reality, was my greatest tormentor, my greatest nightmare, the person who hurt me most in life. And the worst part? No one would know. No one would look for me. We were alone there. That's when I looked at Michael. He was standing a few steps away, recovering his balance after the push, and the expression on his face had completely changed. It was no longer the gentle, quiet man I knew, the one who spoke softly and smiled shyly. His eyes were dark, cold, empty of any emotion I could recognize. But at the same time, there was something burning deep down, way down deep. Something I couldn't name, but that gave me a chill that ran down my entire spine. He was no longer afraid. He was no longer hesitating. He was no longer measuring the consequences. He was decided, and in that endless second, while my father continued dragging me and I continued screaming and crying, I saw Michael move. It wasn't a hurried, desperate movement. It was calculated, precise, controlled, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before, as if some part of him that had been asleep had awakened. The storm outside continued roaring. The wind howled through the trees. The rain continued falling like a waterfall on the roof. And inside that isolated cabin in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by pine trees and darkness, something was about to happen. Something violent, something definitive, something that would change everything forever. Something that would free me once and for all from that man. But I still didn't know the price that would be paid for that freedom. And I still didn't know who the man I'd married really was. What happened in the next few seconds changed my life forever. Michael didn't shout. He didn't panic. He didn't freeze in fear like most men would in the face of someone so furious and determined as my father. He moved with a calm that was almost supernatural, as if time had slowed down just for him, as if each movement had been planned in advance, rehearsed 1,000 times in some dark place in his mind. I saw everything happen as if I were watching from outside my own body. Fear had left me in that strange state where everything seems very sharp and very distant at the same time. He advanced, but it wasn't a clumsy advance of someone desperate trying to help. It was precise, calculated, professional. It was the advance of a predator that had observed its prey long enough and now finally decided to attack. His muscles moved with frightening efficiency, without waste of energy, without hesitation. He passed by me at a speed I could barely follow, and before my father could react or drag me one more inch, Michael grabbed his arm, the arm that held me by the hair, that caused me so much pain. Michael's fingers closed around my father's wrist like an iron vice, squeezing with a force I could see from the tensed muscles of his forearm. And I saw the expression on my father's face change. First, it was surprise, then discomfort. And then, when he finally really looked at Michael, it was fear, genuine fear. He'd finally looked at the man he'd underestimated, and what he saw in that face scared even him, a man who'd spent his life terrorizing others. Michael made a sharp, quick, precise movement, twisting my father's arm in a way that wasn't natural, forcing the joints beyond what they were made to withstand. And I heard. My God, I heard. A horrible crack, like a dry branch breaking under a heavy boot. Then another crack, right after, this one even louder. 2 places. My father's arm had broken in 2 different places. I could see, even in the dimness of the cabin lit only by the fireplace, the strange shape his arm had taken. My father let go of my hair immediately. His hands, the one that still worked, flew to his broken arm in an instinct to protect, to hold, to try to make the pain stop. He let out a scream I'd never heard come from that man. Never. In all the years I'd lived with him, in all the anger I'd seen in him, I'd never heard that sound. It wasn't a scream of rage or indignation. It was a scream of pure, uncontrollable, visceral, animal pain. The scream of someone who had been broken. He fell to his knees on the wooden floor of the cabin with a dull thud, still holding the arm that now hung at an absolutely wrong, horrible angle. The man who had always been so strong, so imposing, so terrifying in my entire life, was there on the floor at my feet, moaning in pain, reduced to absolutely nothing. I crawled back on the bed, still holding the crumpled sheets, trembling from head to toe, my teeth chattering, unable to fully process what was happening. My scalp burned terribly where he'd pulled me, locks of dark hair scattered on the white sheet like black silk threads torn from the roots. But I was free. He'd let me go. His hands were no longer on me. Michael didn't stop. He didn't hesitate for even a second. He bent down, grabbed my father by the collar of his soaked suit with one hand, the fabric making a wet sound when he grabbed it, and by the throat with the other. His fingers closed around my father's neck, and then, in a movement that seemed physically impossible, he lifted my father from the floor. He lifted a grown man, heavy, over 200 pounds, as if he weighed absolutely nothing. As if he were a rag doll. My father's feet hung in the air, kicking, desperately looking for support. Support that didn't exist. His legs kicked the air uselessly. Michael pressed him against the wooden wall of the cabin with such force that I heard the wood crack, splitting under the impact of the body. Little splinters of wood fell to the floor. A small picture that was hanging nearby trembled and fell. The expression on Michael's face was something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. There was no anger there. There was no hatred. There was no satisfaction or pleasure. It was empty. Completely empty. Cold. It was the expression of someone who had done it so many times before that they felt nothing anymore. No emotion, no guilt, no doubt. It was the expression of someone truly dangerous. Much more dangerous than my father could ever dream of being. My father tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, tried to breathe, choking. His hands, the one that still worked, and the one with the broken arm that he could barely move, scratching Michael's arm uselessly, nails scraping the fabric of his shirt, eyes wide, bulging from their sockets, full of absolute terror. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my father afraid. Truly afraid. Not anger disguised as fear, genuine fear. Fear of dying. The man who terrorized everyone around him, who controlled everything and everyone with an iron fist, was terrified. He was seeing his own death in another man's eyes. Michael brought his face close to my father's face. Slowly, deliberately. So close their noses almost touched. So close they breathed the same air. And then he whispered. His voice was low, almost gentle, but loaded with a coldness that cut deeper than any scream. And in the quiet of that cabin, the storm outside had considerably diminished, as if even nature had stopped to witness this transfer of power. I heard every word, every syllable. "I know what you did to her all these years," Michael said, his voice cold as the north wind that blew in the mountains, each word chosen with surgical precision. "I saw it in her eyes. I saw the way she's afraid of you. I saw how she shrinks when you come near. I know exactly what you are. I know men like you." My father tried to deny, tried to say something, his lips moving desperately, but Michael's hand squeezed his throat tighter, completely cutting off the words, cutting off the air. "You're never going to get near her again," Michael continued, and now there was something in his voice. It wasn't anger, it was a promise, a conditional death sentence. "Never again. You're not going to look for her. You're not going to send anyone after her. You're not going to write. You're not going to show up. You're going to forget she exists. Because if you come back—" He paused, letting the words hang in the air like lead, letting the silence speak for him. "If you try anything, if you send anyone after her, if you even think about her the wrong way—" Another pause, longer, heavier. "I won't break your arm. I'll rip your head off your body. And it's not an empty threat. I've done worse, for much less. And I won't have a second of remorse." My father's entire body became completely paralyzed with terror. Even the pain of the broken arm seemed to have been forgotten before the real concrete threat he was hearing. He believed. I saw in his eyes that he believed every word. Maybe it was the way Michael spoke, without emotion, just facts. Maybe it was the absolute coldness in his eyes. Maybe it was the fact that he'd broken his arm in 2 places in a matter of seconds, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. But my father believed, and for the first time he understood that he'd found someone stronger, someone more dangerous. Michael released his throat abruptly, but before my father could fall or recover his balance, Michael grabbed him again by the suit, spun him with force, and practically threw him, really threw him, toward the destroyed door. My father stumbled, tripped over his own feet that barely responded, and fell face first into the puddle of mud and rainwater that had formed right at the entrance of the cabin. His body made a wet, dirty sound as it hit the mud. His broken arm twisted under him, and he screamed again, a muffled scream from the mud that entered his mouth. He was drenched, covered in brown mud that stuck to his expensive suit, his face, his hair. He was moaning in pain, holding the arm that hung uselessly. He was humiliated in a way I'd never seen. Destroyed. Broken not just physically, but in his pride, in his authority, in everything he thought he was. Michael walked to the door with slow, measured steps and looked at my father down there in the mud, looked down literally and figuratively. And he said, his voice loaded with an authority that accepted no questioning, "Leave, now, and don't come back, because if I see you again, there won't be any talking." My father got up with extreme difficulty, slipping in the mud twice before managing to stand, holding his broken arm against his chest in a protective and useless gesture. The rain was falling on him, weaker now but still steady, mixing with tears. Tears. I had never seen that man cry. Not when his mother died, not when he lost money in business, never. But there he was, crying like a child, broken and defeated. He looked at me, one last time, through the open door. And for a second that lasted an eternity, I thought he was going to try again, that he was going to say something, do something. But then he saw Michael standing there at the door, motionless as a statue, waiting, almost wanting him to try, and something in him surrendered completely. The last spark of fight died in his eyes. He turned, slowly, painfully, and began walking with a limp toward the car that was parked on the dirt road, disappearing into the darkness and rain that still fell. We stood there, completely still, listening to the sound of his boots in the mud, the sound of the car door opening and closing, the sound of the engine starting after a few attempts, the car turning around on the narrow road, the tires spinning in the mud, almost getting stuck. And finally, the sound of the engine getting farther away, getting weaker, more distant, disappearing completely into the night. When silence returned, just the rain falling weaker now, just the wind whistling through the pines, just the low crackling of the still-burning fireplace, Michael turned to me. And for the first time since everything had begun, I was afraid of him. It wasn't the same fear I had of my father. It was different. It was fear of not really knowing the person I'd married. Fear of what he'd been. of what he was capable of doing, of what I'd just witnessed. He saw the fear in my eyes. I know he saw it. It was impossible not to see. And something in his expression instantly broke. All that coldness, all that distance, all that controlled violence disappeared. His shoulders fell. His entire body seemed to deflate. He took a step in my direction, his hand extended, but stopped immediately when he saw me instinctively shrink, my body reacting before my mind could process. "Clara," he said, and his voice trembled. For the first time, it trembled. I'm sorry. Sorry you had to see that. Sorry you had to see what I'm capable of. What I used to be. I couldn't speak. My throat was closed. I was processing everything. The man who had terrorized me my entire life was out there, broken, defeated, fleeing into the darkness like a wounded animal. And the man who saved me was here, in front of me, with blood on his hands, metaphorically at least, trembling, afraid of losing me. "I'm not that person anymore," he continued, his voice low, loaded with something that seemed like genuine pain, deep regret. "I was, a long time ago, when I was much younger, before I met you, before I knew it was possible to be different. I was violent. I hurt people. I did terrible things, things I'm not proud of at all, things that haunt me to this day. That's why I left Knoxville. That's why I came here, to Millbrook, to start over, to let that man die and be someone different. Someone better." He ran his hand through his hair, wet with rain and sweat, his eyes shining with something that looked like tears held back for a long time. I swore to myself I'd never use that part of me again, that I'd let it die, buried there in Knoxville along with everything I did wrong. But when I saw him hurting you, when I heard you scream like that, when I saw the terror in your eyes, his voice failed completely. I brought it back. I resurrected that man I'd sworn to bury. For you. Only for you. Because losing you would be worse than going back to being what I was. Tears ran down my face, warm, releasing all the accumulated tension. I didn't know what to feel. Fear? Relief? Gratitude? Confusion? Maybe everything at the same time. Maybe no single feeling was enough to describe it. "He won't come back," Michael said, his voice firmer now, more confident, returning to control. "Men like him, when they meet someone stronger, someone more dangerous, they back down. They're only brave with those who are weaker. They only attack those who can't defend themselves. You're free from him now. Really, forever." And that's when it really hit me. I was free. Really, completely, totally free. The monster who had imprisoned me my entire life had left, defeated, humiliated, with his arm broken and ego shattered into 1,000 pieces. He would never be able to control me again, never be able to touch me again, never be able to look at me that way again, never be able to call me his. It was brutal. It was bloody, even without visible blood. It was violent in a way I never imagined I'd witness in my life. But it was the night I finally, for the first time in 18 years, felt safe. The night I discovered that the man who loved me was willing to bring back his own demons to protect me from mine. The night I became truly free, not on paper, that had happened at the courthouse, but truly free, free in my soul. I got up from the bed slowly, my legs still trembling, and walked to Michael. He stood completely still, not moving an inch, as if afraid to scare me, to make me run, to lose me. I held his face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble against my palms, and looked deep into his eyes. Those eyes that had been so cold, so empty minutes ago, but that now were full of worry, vulnerability, and genuine fear of losing me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice coming out weak but sincere. "Thank you for saving me, for freeing me, for being strong when I couldn't be." He hugged me then, and I let him. I surrendered to that hug completely. We stood there, embracing in the middle of that destroyed cabin, while the storm finally completely passed. The clouds opened up, and the first golden ray of morning sun began to appear through the trees outside, illuminating the beginning of our new life. Today, at my 76 years, I live here in Millbrook, the same town where I was born, where I grew up imprisoned, and where I learned what it is to be truly free. Seems strange, doesn't it? Returning to the place where it all began. But this town doesn't scare me anymore. It's mine now, my way, on my terms. After that night at the cabin, Michael and I came back here. We rented a simple little house in the Oak Ridge neighborhood, far from that big house with the iron gate where I'd grown up. My father never appeared again. Never. We found out later, through acquaintances, that he'd left Millbrook a few days after that night, sold the land hastily, sold the house, and left. They say he went to the interior of Alabama, to a small town where no one knew him. He died about 10 years later, alone. When they told me, I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness. Just nothing. That man had already died for me that stormy night. My mother, poor thing, stayed. She came to live with me and Michael a few years later. We never talked about what had happened, she never asked, and I never told. But I saw in her eyes a silent gratitude. She lived with us until she passed away in 1985, sleeping in the armchair after lunch, peaceful. It was a good death, you know, without pain, without fear, different from how she'd lived. Michael and I had 3 children, Julian, who was born in 1968, Marianne in 1970, and Lucas, the youngest, in 1973. I raised them differently from how I was raised. They had freedom. They had affection without prisons. They had a father who was present, protective, but who was never, never controlling. Michael learned to be gentle without being weak, to be firm without being violent. He became the man he wanted to be, and I was proud of him every day. We worked hard. He continued with carpentry, made custom furniture, and became known in town for the beautiful work he did. I sewed for others, made clothes for the neighbors' children, embroidered wedding trousseaux. We didn't have much, but we had enough. And we had peace. Oh, how we had peace. It was 50 years of marriage, 50 years of waking up next to him, of drinking coffee together on the porch, of raising the children, of seeing grandchildren being born. 50 years of a simple life, but full of true love. He never needed to be that man he was that night again. That stayed stored away, buried, and only came out once, to save me. When he passed, 8 years ago, from a quick heart attack while working in the workshop, I thought I wouldn't be able to continue. But I continued. For the children, for the grandchildren, and for myself. Because he would have wanted me to continue. Today I live in this little house we bought together in 1975, here in the Oak Hill neighborhood. Yes, the same neighborhood where my father's house was, but on the other side, far away. It's a small wooden house with a little yard I love. I have my herb gardens I tend every day. The rosemary has grown so much it's become almost a bush. I have my chickens that give me fresh eggs every morning. I have the apple tree I planted as soon as we moved here, and that today already bears sweet fruit that I make into jelly for the grandchildren. My 3 children live here in Millbrook, too. Julian is an accountant, married to Patricia, has 2 adult children. Marianne is a teacher, like Miss Hilda who taught me as a child, and has 3 children. Lucas is a mechanic, works with trucks, and has a daughter, Andrea, who's my most attached granddaughter, the one who taught me how to use the computer. They come visit me every week, taking turns. Sunday, there's always someone here for lunch with me. We make those old dishes, fried chicken, pot roast, cornbread, biscuits with gravy. The house fills with noise, with laughter, with life. It's so different from that silent house where I grew up, where fear lived in every corner. Every Wednesday, I go to the neighborhood farmer's market to sell my embroidery. It's not for the money. The kids want to help me, but I insist on having my independence. It's more for the company, you know? I chat with the other ladies, exchange recipes, find out the neighborhood news. Life is good when it's simple like this. Sometimes, when I'm alone here on the porch, drinking my coffee in the late afternoon, I think about that night, the storm, the fear, the violence, and how that, as terrible as it was my liberation. It was the day I stopped being someone's property and became the owner of myself. I'm not angry at my father. Not anymore. I feel sorry for him. Sorry for a man who loved so wrongly that he destroyed himself and almost destroyed his daughter. But he didn't succeed. I survived. I won. I lived a beautiful life, full of true love, and raised children who know what respect is, what freedom is, what true love is. I look at Michael's picture hanging on the living room wall. The photo was taken on our 40th wedding anniversary, and I'm grateful. Grateful that he was brave enough to use that terrible force he had stored away to protect me. Grateful that he was gentle enough to never need to use it again. Grateful for 50 years of a life I never thought I'd be able to have. Life is funny, you know? We're born in a prison, we learn to survive, and one day, if we're lucky, we find someone who breaks the chains. Michael was my key, my liberation, my home. And today, in this simple house, surrounded by my children and grandchildren, with my garden blooming and my chickens pecking in the yard, I am complete. I am free. I am happy. My dear ones, my loves, if there's someone there listening to me who's going through something similar to what I went through, I want to tell you something. True love doesn't imprison. True love doesn't control. True love doesn't make you afraid. It took me 18 years to understand that. 18 years thinking that was normal, that fathers were like that I had to accept it. But no, my child, no. No one, not father, not mother, not husband, not anyone, has the right to treat you as property. You're not an object, you're a person. You have the right to be free. I learned there's a difference between protection and prison. Protection gives you wings, teaches you to fly, and stays nearby in case you fall. Prison cuts your wings, keeps you on the ground, and convinces you that you were born to crawl. If someone says they love you but isolates you, controls you, diminishes you, my dear, that's not love. That's possession. And you weren't born to be possessed by anyone. I learned that courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being afraid and still taking the step. I was so afraid that Monday in January, when I signed those papers at the courthouse, my hands were shaking, but I signed, because living with fear every day is worse than having courage for one day. I learned that sometimes liberation comes in forms we don't expect. It comes brutal, it comes violent, it comes painful. That stormy night was terrifying, but it was my liberation. And I'm not ashamed of having needed help. I'm not ashamed that someone had to be strong for me when I couldn't be. We don't need to be strong alone. We need to find those who are strong with us, not against us. I learned that starting over is possible. It's always possible. I started over at 18. You can start over at any age. It's never too late to choose freedom. It's never too late to choose life. If you're trapped in a house where they control you, where they diminish you, where they make you feel worthless, listen to what this grandma is saying. You're worth everything. You deserve to be free. And there are people ready to help you. There are authorities, there are organizations, there are people who understand. You don't have to suffer alone. And if you know someone who's in that situation, don't pretend you don't see. Extend your hand. Sometimes a word, a gesture, an open door can save a life, can be the difference between staying trapped and finally being free. I had 50 years of happiness after a night of terror. 50 years, 3 children, grandchildren, a life full of true love. It was worth every tear, every fear, every pain. Because today, I am free, and you can be too. Now, my dear ones, I need to make a very special, very important request. If this story touched your heart, if you understood the message, if you feel you need to share this with someone who needs to hear it, I beg you, subscribe to this channel now and turn on the notification bell. Because every week I come here to tell stories of overcoming, of liberation, of women who won. And maybe the next story is exactly what you or someone you love needs to hear to have the courage to take the first step toward freedom. And leave me a comment down below with just one word. Free. Just that word. Free. So I know you watched until the end, that you understood, that you're with me in this chain of liberation and hope. Commenting is quick, it costs nothing, but it means the world to this grandma here. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Because maybe tomorrow you'll meet someone who needs to hear these words and you'll be able to share this video. You'll be able to be the key that opens someone's prison. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are free. You deserve to be free. And I'm rooting for each and every one of you. A big hug from this grandma here. Until the next story.